Hi, everyone.
Lit. Okay. Let's give folks like 1 more minute to transition, and then how y'all doing?
Good.
Ray, Miss Cindy, y'all good?
Good. Can you all hear me?
Can you hear us?
All right. Yeah. Yeah, I can hear. I want to
And
make
I'm
sure.
right side up. Yeah.
I've been bugging Erica all morning because I was nervous about this new platform. I should have got on the instruction part instead of sending someone else to do it for me. Sorry about that.
It's okay. It's okay. We are here. We made it. So for
Yes.
folks that are here now, this is our faculty panel, and it's going to be amazing. Rajan Gordon is going to be the moderator, and then he'll introduce himself, and then he'll allow the panelists to introduce themselves. So enjoy. I'm super, super excited for this. Y'all should be too. And I'm going to exit now. See y'all later.
All right. Hey everyone, how's it going? I guess everybody's ready to start, panelists.
Yep.
All right, can everybody hear me? Perfect. So I'll give a brief introduction. My name is Rajan Gordon. I'm from Trent, New Jersey. I am the Associate Director of the Education Opportunity Fund at Montclair State in New Jersey. I'm also a PhD candidate, finishing a PhD in Family Science Human Development, studying leadership origins of Black male college student leaders at predominantly white institutions. So I'm going to pass it over to our panelists in any order they choose so they can introduce themselves.
I'll start. Can you all hear me? You guys hear me? Yes. Okay. I'm Lisa Simmons. I am a lecturer at Towson University, where I've been for the last 11 years. I teach in the College of Business and Economics. I teach business communications as well as professional experience, which is an internship class. I am an HR practitioner by profession, specializing specifically in talent acquisitions, which just means I do the hiring. And I too am a doctoral candidate. I'm at Morgan State University finishing up working on, coincidentally, Black faculty experiences at PWI specifically, so we can create better strategies for recruitment and retention. So I'm super excited about this.
I'm happy to go next. I'm Amber Spry. Can everyone hear me? It's good. I'm Amber Spry. I am a professor, assistant professor of politics and African American studies at Brandeis University. I got my PhD at Columbia University, and prior to that, I did my BA at UMBC. Marcus and I actually went to undergrad together, so we've known each other for a long time, and we're happy to be colleagues and co-authors now. Which is a really cool kind of journey through academia from very different, similar starting points, then different paths, and then converging again. Yeah, and I have, I guess UMBC was a really diverse campus, I guess still considered PWI, but certainly my professionalization through graduate school and now as a faculty member are at predominantly white institutions. And I think there's some unique things about being a faculty member and dealing with things like hypervisibility and accessibility and navigating appointments at these kinds of institutions. So I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Hey, I'm Marcus Board. I know Amber, so that's my claim to fame. I am an assistant professor in the Department of African American Studies at Georgetown. I've been here for 3 years now, training in political science, and went to UMBC, a school that I love. My work deals with radical Black feminist theory, and particularly the ways that power and domination seep into social movements. So a lot of the work that I do, the book that I'm working on right now, talks about how we can explain people's advocacy for racial justice movements and how, in spite of the fact that the current movement that we're in right now is a race and gender-based justice movement, among other things. I think that they also tap into ableism. They also tap into sexuality, and many other things. And so how people end up shortchanging movements to suit their own needs. So very happy to be here. Very grateful to Erica for inviting me, and looking forward to our.
All right. So I'm Rayshawn Ray. I'm a professor of sociology at the University of Maryland in College Park. I'm also a David Rubenstein Fellow at the Brookings Institution. And in Maryland, I'm currently leading our new anti-Black racism initiative. So I'm really excited about this conversation. I thank Erica for inviting me and putting this together. The entire day has been amazing. I did my undergraduate work at the University of Memphis, and then I did my PhD work at Indiana University, which I'm imagining we'll talk quite a bit about. Very different environment from being at the University of Maryland. Indiana is 4% Black and even less Black people living in Bloomington. After I finished Indiana, I did a postdoc at UC Berkeley, and I've been physically in Maryland for the past 8 years.
All right. That's our lovely panel. I had to hold myself back. I had like a tidbit for each of you that I wanted to add in. Such amazing work that you do on the faculty level within your respective institutions. But let's jump right into it. I'm going to pivot off and on. I have my large screen, which can allow me to have multiple screens up at once. So I'm going to pivot back and forth to that. Obviously, the work from home environment, we had to get crafty. So the first thing I think is one of the most important questions. How has your experience been as a Black faculty member at predominantly white institutions? And anyone, and just to preface, anyone can answer any question. I'll let you know when there's a question that I would need to answer from everyone, but anyone can answer any question in any variation. Depending on your answers, I might pick and choose and say this person has to answer that person.
I'm happy to go first unless somebody else wants to. So my experience, I think, has been, mine is a little bit more unique, I think, because I didn't come into the university as an academic. I came as a professionally qualified person. So I used to be the person who would come into the classrooms in the business classrooms and do presentations on interviewing skills and networking skills and resume writing. And it just so happened, I was like, hey, if anybody, if you ever need me to teach a class, I'm happy to do so. And so, that conversation, one class turned into two classes, turned into full time, while still keeping, being an HR practitioner on the side. So while I still definitely have the things that we probably all experience in a PWI, the microaggressions, the invisible workloads and things of that nature. For me, I was also an undergrad. I did undergrad at Towson. So I was there between 88 and 92, and it was a very different environment than it is now. So I was able to navigate things, 30 years ago. And so I think I have a different lens as a faculty now in my ability to sort of navigate the terrain that not a lot of my colleagues have. Like I'm a little more comfortable there. And I also think because I am not on the tenure track, like you can't get a degree in what I'm teaching. It gives me a little bit more flexibility to be a little more vocal because I'm not afraid of not being tenured or, someone's going to do something to keep me from getting tenured. So I find that I'm usually that other faculty will come to and say, hey, can you ask this question or can you do this? Like there's always a lot of whispering and, just a lot of people are just really intimidated. And I just, coming out of a corporate environment, I'm very used to being a lot of times the only. And so I was very comfortable. It was a very comfortable transition going into a PWI. It didn't shock me at all. I'm always kind of very firmly hold my ground, but I'm able to do that because I don't have the tenure being held over me like some people do. So my experience has been relatively positive. I do what I do never for the other faculty. Everything that I do is always for the student. So I keep a focus, even when I'm at my most frustrated with the faculty and the microaggressions and all the other things that come with it. When I come back to the why am I here, it always brings me back.
So you added an amazing point that I was waiting to come up. So the next and I see Amber smiling. The next panelist to answer the question, please touch on that red button of tenure and how that can play into your experience as well.
I can speak about that. So one of the challenges I think that students and faculty from underrepresented backgrounds might face at predominantly white institutions is the challenge of precarity, right? Sometimes we feel like our positions at these institutions are precarious by virtue of the position itself, but also because of the way that we're situated in those positions and the way that our situations are affected by, these visible characteristics like our race or gender, but also invisible things, right? Like our access to resources, our knowledge of this sort of hidden curriculum of how people get ahead in different ways. And so, I maybe folks can chime in the chat, just to get a sense of who the audience is for this panel in particular, whether we're talking to mostly students who want to know, about the pathway to academia, or whether we're talking to other faculty members or people who might be at similar stages in their progression through the academy. So it would be cool to see in the chat who's attending right now. So that we can kind of speak to those things. But one of the things that I think of often in my position now, having a joint appointment means I'm constantly thinking about pleasing multiple audiences, right? And so my precarity is a very specific one, right? Where I have to publish and do research as a political scientist, but also always be speaking to the field of African American studies, right? And I think that's a challenge that many people face is, wanting to do work that speaks to a particular audience, but needing to narrate that work or frame that work in ways that ensure our longevity in the institution.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that answer. Does anyone else want to touch on that question?
Go ahead, Marcus. I'll go after you.
Sorry about that. What I was going to say is similar to Amber. So I'm in an African American Studies department at Georgetown, which quite infamously was started after they did the racial reconciliation efforts after out about the school staying afloat because they sold 272 enslaved people. So as was discussed in the student panel by one of our students, Fatima, the connection to capitalism is something that really drives a lot of the relationship in terms of your experience as a Black faculty member. So a lot of what I hear from senior faculty are these traumatic horror stories from a wide range of institutions, of different disciplinary backgrounds. And so I'm in African American Studies, trained in political science. And so I always have to cross that bridge as well in terms of speaking to Black politics, but speaking to racial politics broadly, and still coming back to this African American Studies background. And so it's tough to see accomplished and experienced faculty members traumatized from their experiences. And when I arrived and not having been trained as well in the career aspects of the discipline, I had a lot of ground to cover, but a lot of what I was getting really rubbed up against my organizing experience in terms of just organizing and activism, in terms of standing up to systems of injustice. And so what I've realized is that even though I'm in an IFAM department, which is all Black, I'm still at a white university, but even if I were at an HBCU, the problems would still persist. The entire academic institution as a unit is rife with patriarchy and white supremacy, no matter where you're at. Right. And so that process changes people. And I'm very fortunate in that I hadn't had very many positive educational experiences in my lifetime. And so I have a lifetime's worth of trying to start trouble and pushing back against authority figures. And so now that I'm here, it's like, well, do you keep figuring out which battles to fight? And figuring that out is really difficult when a lot of the people who survive in these atmospheres have so many scars that it's hard for them to tell you which way to turn. And so it's been a learning process, and I'm very grateful and thankful that, as Amber mentioned, at UMBC, we had such a diverse background and experience. And I've had professors and even the president of the university, Amber and I have talked to, who really gives us a better, a more rounded perspective. So you really have to be on point at all times, or else.
Or else.
Yeah. I mean, I think you definitely have to be on point at all times. I mean, some of the things that Marcus said. So just to tell people, and I mentioned this a second ago, but I'll say it again. So after I finished my PhD, I did a postdoc, and then since I've been in Maryland, I've progressed from assistant to getting tenure as an associate, and then recently being promoted to full. So going through that entire pipeline, thank you. I appreciate it. The grind is real. But this is the thing about it. It's difficult, but it's doable. And part of what we just heard from all the other panelists is that the academy wasn't built for us, but that doesn't mean we can't make it for us. And part of what we have to do is realize that this is a job. Oftentimes it does become a part of our own identities, but we have to focus on it as a job. Part of what that means is figuring out strategies to not just survive, but thrive. That's part of what Marcus is talking about. So as some people may know, I study policing and I study health disparities. So, I mean, what's happening in 2020 is stuff I've been writing about for a decade that just kind of hit everyone else. But in kind of thinking through that, the academy will beat you down. It will beat you up. And this is the key point. It will beat everybody up. It just beats us up more based on the identities we have, based on our race, based on our gender, based on people's sexual orientation and the like. So I think it's a few things to keep in mind that I always keep in mind. First biggest thing is, particularly if you're at a R1 or any place that is trying to aspire to be like an R1 or R2, it's all about publishing. A lot of things go away when you publish. Bottom line is you have to publish. Like that is the numero uno thing you have to do. Everything else is secondary at that point. The next thing I say is balance is extremely key. You have to have work-life balance. You cannot work all the time. Now, with that being said, I work a lot, but you know what? I enjoy it, but I also have balance. I have kids, I have a wife, I have family members, I have friends. I make sure that I talk to the funniest people I know at least once a day via text, on the phone, when I'm commuting. I make sure they make me laugh. When someone's done something at work today that's honestly not going to matter tomorrow, but it matters a lot today, and it's probably increasing my blood pressure, it's probably doing all these things, I make sure that I reflect on that. The other thing of balance is you have to exercise and you have to eat healthy. So part of being an academic is that our lives aren't structured. We can just work and go, but you have to structure your life. The other thing that I'll say that I think I did pretty well is I do a lot of stuff outside of the academy that now all of a sudden is starting to be a part of the academy, like what we call in sociology, public sociology, or what other people call in other disciplines doing public work. That's not always rewarded internally. Being at the University of Maryland helps to a certain extent because we're so close to the Beltway. But I say all that to say everyone doesn't have to know everything you do. So a lot of the public stuff I did before I got tenure, my colleagues didn't have to know that, because then they would attribute that if a paper gets rejected, or if I only had one or two articles published this year, that I could have more if I wasn't doing this work. And of course, what they don't realize is in order for me to do my academic work, I have to do that other community work. I have to do that other policy work because it balances me. And so part of thinking about that, two things that I'll say that help me. The first thing is I would have monthly meetings with different colleagues in my department and throughout my college who are going to be reviewing me for tenure. Part of doing that is I would share my work with them. And to the point that we've heard, you have to put on a fresh face. Like you always have to be on. We can't get lax with these people. We work with them, right? They're not our friends. Like it can grow into a friendship, but people have to earn that. So I treat these sort of meetings as work meetings, and I go in and I share my work. And then when they ask to see it, I share it with them. Because oftentimes when you're in a department, you're there because people do want you there and they want to see you succeed. So you have to share your work. The other thing I'll say is, particularly as an assistant, we can find people who have 9 lives to share on us. I remember at a Ford Foundation conference, James Jackson in Michigan talked about being a full professor. And when you get to that point, you have lives you can use on other people. So when something happens to an assistant professor in my department and they come to me, and I say, do you want me to handle this? Because I can handle this. and I can go handle it, and the consequences aren't as severe as if they were trying to handle it. So you have these meetings to figure out who you can trust, to figure out who's going to be an ally for you, to figure out who, more importantly, is going to advocate for you. Because see, being an ally and being an advocate are two different things. Being an ally means you can stand in solidarity with someone, but you can be silent. Being an advocate means when the tenured faculty members sit at a table, or when you're a PhD candidate and you're applying for jobs and faculty are at a table. An advocate is a person who speaks up and speaks out for you when you're not present. And they don't care whether or not those good things get back to you or not. You have to figure out who those advocates are, because those are the people that are going to help you progress through the pipeline. Those are the people that are going to be transparent with you so that you can figure out the things that you need to do.
Thank you. Thank you. That was amazing insight from our panelists. I share similar sentiments as Ms. Simmons, because, you know, teaching, but that not being what I do full time gives me the creative license to kind of keep it real with a lot of our students. And also just a lot of my colleagues or a lot of friends that I have who went on to the tenure track, similar to Marcus and Amber, I see those struggles, especially at PWIs, that they go through, that they say, well, I can't do this, or I can't say this too much, or I got to find who to trust, because also my tenure is on the line. So that's extremely important. And Dr. Rashawn, thank you for that insight for when you get to that point and how you can help. It's more about lifting as we climb, and you're an example of you're climbing up, but you're also reaching back to lift others up as well. So I appreciate that. I'm going to jump around a little bit from the order of some of the questions to kind of keep it in the same vein, but I do want to know, how can faculty aim to create an inclusive environment for Black students while providing tools for self-care?
I can start, I guess, here. So I think in terms of creating an inclusive environment for Black students in particular, I think transparency is really important. So I think it's really important for students to know who you are, why you're here, where you're coming from. I think information like that, while it is important to remember that this is a job, I also think it's important that if we are trying to undermine these systems, we don't need to replicate them entirely. At least we need to be at least cognizant of that. Students are in a marginalized position, a marginalized power position. And I think it's important for those of us who are, at least on some level, in a position of authority with them, to minimize and humble ourselves, educated selves, to treat the learning experience like something that's actually a part of life, rather than just something that has been distorted for the purposes of the university. So I think it's really important to be transparent, to let them know who you are and what you intend in that space and the spaces with them, so that they can find room to be able to understand who they are while they're with you. And so I think one of the most important things for students is to be able to learn what they're about. Like what Dr. Ray was saying is really important, but I think at the bottom of it, it's identifying what you want. So you have to know who you are to know what you want. And if the students don't know who they are, then it's impossible for them to know where they want to push, where they want to take a risk, or where they want to fall back a little bit. And I think a part of that process, it's something that we can do that's very important. And I think it's something we need to do.
One thing I completely agree with that. I mean, I think the transparency is key. I think when it comes to thinking about self-care, oftentimes our institutions are not built to take care of us. And we have to recognize that. It doesn't mean that we can't find people to help us take care of ourselves. But what I found throughout my academic journey is that the universities aren't places where I'm going to get that self-care. Now, there are people at the university who can help with that self-care. But oftentimes the self-care for me has come outside of these spaces, at people's houses, where I can be comfortable, where I can do the sort of things where I can be vulnerable and have those conversations. And I remember being in grad school, advanced graduate students' cars, just sitting there like basically crying, talking about how traumatizing certain experiences are. I think those are the moments where you learn strategies to employ self-care. I think from a mentor standpoint, though, and I've published on mentoring and mentee relationships. And one of the biggest findings that comes out of it is that women of color in particular get less optimal mentoring experiences than other groups. And we have to be continuously be clear. I think Marcus said this earlier about the intersection between race and gender. And so if you're a student or if you're a mentor, I think the biggest thing you have to do is figure out your mentoring style. So this article that I wrote with Shiri Noy, we took this data set of graduate students, and it came back with like 6 different mentoring styles, from effective to intellectual to instrumental to respectful. And so for me, I had to, and available was another one. I had to figure out what type of mentor I am. And I should say was, because as I've gotten busier, like I edit a journal, I run a center, I'm working at this nonprofit, my time has shrunk in a sense where a premium that I used to have as a mentor, which was availability, I don't have a lot of that. And I struggled with how to make sense of that. So I say all that to say, expectations are key. If you're a student or a mentor, you have to set expectations. And Marcus essentially said this when he was like, look, figure out what you're going to give and figure out what they're going to give. You can have a mentoring contract, but more importantly, maybe you put this in an email to have the expectations about what you're doing. And for me, I try to facilitate a couple of things. I try to facilitate research, and I try to facilitate publishing opportunities that can help students advance their careers. Sorry, Amber, go ahead.
No, I was going to 2-finger on this point because I think it's an excellent one. And I see that there's kind of a mix of students and people kind of working their way through academia in the chat. So I'll speak to mentorship in a broad sense. I think it's important to also recognize that there's different kinds of mentors, and you're going to have different dimensions of mentorship at different stages of your career. So I think for me, it's been especially helpful to think about mentorship as these sort of overlapping bubbles of people who do different things and that I have different relationships with. So I have peer mentors, right? People who are at similar stages. I consider Marcus to be one of my peer mentors, right? This is a person that I'm asking questions to, like, hey, did you have this kind of experience and how did you navigate that? Because it's important to recognize that, you know, sometimes the biggest, you know, I think it's easy to see people at your same career stage as competitors. But I think one of the most disruptive and important things that we can do is to build supportive networks and supportive communities at a peer-to-peer level. The second way I think about mentorship is people who are, you know, just a little bit further beyond me, right? So maybe 3 or 4 years down the track from where I aspire to be. And I cultivate relationships with those people because those are the people who are going to write my letters. Those are the people who are going to review my articles. Those are the people who are going to be, you know, attending my book conference and giving me feedback on my work and possibly on awards committees, right? And all of these sort of little unspoken things are the things that help advance your career in really significant ways. And so I'm always kind of cultivating those relationships. And the last way that I think about mentorship is people who are, you know, my aspirational mentors, right? So they might not be people that I have a direct relationship with or that I speak to regularly, but they're people whose careers I can model after, right? And so these are people that I can kind of look at their trajectory and see, you know, where have they published? Where have they held fellowships? What types of grants have they applied for? And you know, more often than not, when I do reach out to those people, they're incredibly receptive to hearing from me. The other thing I'll say is that I think it's important, especially for, and I'm going to speak specifically to Black women right now, it's important to teach people how to mentor you. And that's an additional burden and it's not fair, but it's the reality that we face because so much of this profession and so much of this experience at predominantly white institutions is based on informal networks. And I'll give you an example. When I was in graduate school, I had a fantastic advisor, really at the top of the field, but his style was so informal. So, you know, he would go, he would invite graduate students to go running in the park in the morning at like 6 in the morning. And, you know, this wasn't anything formalized. It wasn't anything that was open to the department. It was just something that if you knew about it and you wanted to go, you could be there. And it wasn't an academic experience, but during these runs at 6 in the morning, all these guys who felt comfortable putting on their athletic clothes and running with, their advisor in the park in a secluded area at like an ungodly hour of the day, guess what they were talking about? Research opportunities. They were talking about different fellowships they could apply for. They were talking about, what types of conferences to be attending. And I wasn't in on any of those conversations because I'm not going to put on my running shorts and get up at 6 a.m. to jog with a guy in the middle of Central Park. I'm just not, right? And so one of the things I had to learn very quickly that has served me well so far is to tell people what types of environments I want to be in and how they can help me within the scope of those environments. And so that looks different for different people, but it's important to recognize early on the power of those informal networks and recognize how you can replicate some of those conversations in environments that feel more appropriate to your particular circumstances.
That's very important, Dr. Spry. I do want to highlight what you said about peer mentors and just let the audience know. Sometimes we look at peer mentors or we look at peer-to-peer relationships as competition. But it's important to realize that we're all going through this at the same time, especially if they're peers, and we can learn so much from each other, like that information that you would not have if you weren't going on that 6 a.m. run. But maybe a friend, maybe Dr. Board was going on that 6 a.m. run, came back and said, hey, Amber, and fix your face, Dr. Board. I said, he like, nope, not at 6 a.m. But bringing you that information back just because we have a peer-to-peer mentoring relationship. And someone might hear something, know your interest in your research or your interest in your aspirations and say, hey, I think this is a really good fit. And I think that's what's extremely important about peer-to-peer mentor relationships. It's not always about, oh, I don't want you to know what I'm doing because we're competing. It's helping each other grow individually. And there's so much out there, so much research and so much knowledge and so much that we can learn from each other, not just on my mentor is a person who's older than me, who's done more than me, who's more accomplished that I want to be like, but so much we can learn from each other from a peer-to-peer perspective. So I want to thank you for that.
So I had something to I in complete agreement with what everyone said. I saw a comment in the chat a while ago that I wanted to address. Someone had asked, what can students do to help take care of their mentors? Which I think was an interesting question because I've never had a student ask that, and I think sometimes as a Black woman, I mentor a lot of students. And I think as a Black woman, I think there's an expectation, or just as a woman in general, but specifically a Black woman, because that's what I am. I think there's this expectation that we're just going to be more nurturing. And so, I often find myself in situations where not only am I mentoring on just how to navigate school, I found myself in times, taking people into my home, paying rent, just doing those things. Because I look at people, I've got 5 children of my own. I look at my students as like my kids, and the things that, that some of these students are going through, specifically the represented ones, the things that they're going through are very different than the things that my children are going through. And so there's this added burden, I feel, on me to make sure that they have what they need, no matter what that looks like. And that definitely takes a toll. So in answer to the question, how can you make sure your mentors are okay? Remember that they are, that they're people, they have families, make sure that that there are some boundaries, and make sure that you do understand that while we love you to pieces, we do still have other obligations and things that we have to take care of, and not, I guess not to have an expectation at 11 p.m. on a Saturday that, your mentor may reach out to you, in regards to something that may be going on, which is something that I feel like my mentees think, like all hours of the day or night, because they know that in my heart, I always want to help. But at some point, we have to have a boundary, because it definitely takes its toll on me in particular, as a wife, as a mother, as a person with a mother with Alzheimer's, that's her primary caregiver. We're people still at the end of the day. And while we're doing all these other things, we still are people. So the best way I think you can help take care of your mentors is just to remember, we're superheroes a lot of times, but we get tired. And just give us the space to do that sometimes.
And I would add, as much as we love you all, the mentees we have, and I'm sure there's so many mentees across this entire panel. Speaking of time and self-preservation, and if I can point out one example that I'm sure we've all faced from our mentees, that next day, same day, next hour need of a recommendation. That's if you could give us a little bit more time to work with that. All of my mentees out there, all of my students, or even staff and faculty who aspire to be faculty members, that timeline, that recommendation line, just gives us a little bit more time with that. But speaking of self-preservation, I do want to jump into the next question, which focuses on self-preservation of you all. And I think this question kind of speaks to largely the members, students, and staff members I saw in the chat that are aspiring to be faculty members. And I want to talk about this notion of faculty members that I know not to be true, just from working with them in my committee. This notion of faculty members is they're on campus 2-3 times a week, and that's it, and they live in a life. If I could debunk that for a second, just from talking to my committee members and faculty members over the years, they probably put in 50, 60, 70, 80 hours a week. It's just more comfortable to sit, grade, write papers, do research, get on the calls at home than it is in their office. So I want to debunk that for a little bit and then lean into self-preservation with all of that going on, because I work closely with faculty members. You're all faculty members. I'm hearing your stories. I'm looking it up. And Dr. Rashawn Ray, as you were talking, I'm Google scholaring your articles. So if y'all got some gems, drop them article names. You're going to get those Google Scholar hits. But how do you, with all of that going on, how do you practice self-preservation, not just for yourself, but also thinking about the pressures of academia, mainly to ensure that you show up full and available to your students?
I mean, you all should definitely just call me Rayshawn. Like, it's just on the strength all the time. But I mean, it is like Saturday afternoon. It's definitely
to be honest,
Rayshawn, but I appreciate it.
To be honest, my brother is named Rayshawn.
That's cool.
Spelling, so it's a little creepy for me. Out of 8 brothers, I'm like, you had to pick the one that sounds similar to my name. So, so I might stick to Dr. Ray. I'm letting you know that now, just because when I say Rayshawn, I might pick up the phone and cuss him out. But
that's hilarious. Okay, I get it. Well, everybody else should do that. I mean, and I also seen Dr. Al Tomorrow in the chat, who people should definitely chat up, who is now working at Harvard, but had been working at the NYU Abu Dhabi campus and helped me when we were in graduate school in Indiana get through a lot of moments. And we still have a group. So when we talk about self-preservation, I'll say a couple of specific things about it. And I mentioned Alta because she's part of this group. So I formed a professional and a personal council. I feel like these are people who I can be vulnerable with, who I can rely on for advice, who won't judge me. They just love me for me. And it's a personal council. So it's my mom. Before my granddad and uncle passed away, it was them too, but my grandma, my aunt, my wife. And then I have a group of friends, and Alta is part of this group, and she knows some of these other people who we were in school at the same time. And then I have a professional council. These are mentors, but I mean, Amber, Marcus, and Lisa laid it out in terms of looking up and down the pipeline, that I think at times we don't realize that, yes, we're learning from people above us, but we can also learn people laterally from us as well as below us. So I formed these councils. They might change over time based on what I think I need. And whenever I'm in a difficult situation, I get advice from them. And I use that counsel all the time as I layer up. I think the other thing, and I mentioned this earlier, but I cannot stress it enough. And you talked about work hours. I mean, I don't even know how many work hours I work. I mean, I work a lot of hours. I mean, it's some weeks is 60, some weeks is 70, some weeks is 80. I work a lot of hours. But I also really, really enjoy what I do on top of that. And so the final thing I'll say, and I mentioned this earlier, is about balance. Balance is so, so important. And for me, when oftentimes my family structure balances things for me. But even before I was married and had kids, I would build in ways where I'm doing things that I enjoy. So as an example, as my career has progressed, that's changed. So whenever I go out of town to give a talk, obviously none of that's happening in 2020. All I'm doing is walking in the office, getting on webinars. But when I would travel to give a talk and I would finish the last night of the talk, I would go watch a movie in whatever city I was in. Because as my kids were growing up, I have an 8 and a 9-year-old, as they were growing up, we didn't have time to do those kind of things. My wife has her own career. She's super successful doing what she's doing, but I love movies. So I would take an opportunity to take 2 hours to do that. I also exercise 4 to 5 times a week. It's so important. So to Amber's point, I'm not getting up at 6 a.m. And when I was a grad student, I definitely wasn't running with my professor at 6 a.m. I just wasn't going to do that. I didn't feel comfortable doing that either. But there were other people who I could exercise with. And I can't stress balance enough. And the final thing I'll say is about scheduling. Even though I work a lot, I schedule everything. Not only do I schedule my work life, I also schedule my personal life, because what I started noticing is when I would look on my calendar and wouldn't see anything, I would just load it up with more work. So what I had to start doing was I drop my kids off at school, 8 to 9 a.m. I'm at the gym. Somebody's like, can you meet at 9 o'clock? Nope, I'm busy. I already got a meeting. Well, what are you doing? I just got to meet. I got to meet with myself to go to the gym because I need this hour before I deal with you all. So I was scheduling these moments where it was very, very important to take that self-care time for yourself, because the academy will eat us up. And we have to be the ones to pause that before it eats us up.
Just piggyback on that really quickly. So the professional experience class that I teach, we use the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. And that actually is habit number 3, which is put first things first. And so it is, I live by the 7 habits. And the thing that is so important is to schedule your priorities. So those things that are important to you, you make sure you get those on the calendar immediately. And so, to your point, I schedule date night. I schedule time with my kids. I schedule time for mani-pedis. So the time that's for me is for me. Anything else, hey, can you do this? Nope, I'm not available. And that chapter is very clear. No is a complete sentence. It doesn't need an explanation. You don't need to know what I have to do. If I'm not available, I'm not available. And if you don't take the time to schedule those things that are important to you, you will find that other people will schedule it for you, and they'll start to monopolize your time. So that is such an important point, and one that I live by, actually.
I'll just add really quickly, schedule things that are important to you. Yes. Schedule things that are important to your career also. I think one of the things that might come as a shock to students is that teaching, if you're a faculty member on the tenure track, the teaching is often the thing that we love the most, but it's the thing that's usually incentivized the least. And so if you've got great mentors and great relationships with faculty members and you're close to them and you're popping in their office, just know how much that's not their job to be accessible all the time. And it pains me sometimes to say that, because I love these relationships that I have with my students. It means so much to me to be visible in the space that I'm in and to have the relationships I have. But for me to ensure my longevity in my position, I have to prioritize other things and make sure that those things get my peak hours and my peak attention when I need to, so that I can do the things that help me feel like I'm in a mode of self-preservation. And so one of the things that I've learned how to do, to Dr. Ray's point, I have a no committee, right? And this is like people who are kind of close to me at a similar level as me. And I like, every time I get a request that I'm kind of like, I kind of want to do it, but I don't know if that's like super advantageous. I'll email this group. It's 5 of us. We're all women. We're all at a similar point in our careers. And I'll just say, hey, this thing that came across my desk, does that make sense? And sometimes they'll say, yeah, that sounds like that really is aligned with your goals, and that makes sense for the book that you're writing, and that, but most of the time they'll be like, you need to say no. And that's exactly right. No is a complete sentence. The other thing that I do is I make myself accessible and available to my students, but I do it with boundaries, right? And so if I know that's something that's important to me and that I want to be able to do, I make that accessibility a priority, but I do it with limitations so that I'm not burning myself out, so that I can continue to be available. So, my students know office hours are 12 to 1 and they're by appointment, and that's to respect their time as well, right? Like, that's so that students aren't kind of hanging out outside my office indefinitely. Everybody knows they have a time slot. We all respect our time slots. And that, being able to kind of make sure that your priorities are in alignment, not just with what you love to do and what makes you feel whole, but also with the things that are important to your career in the long term, because we have goals, right? We have goals that we want to achieve and we have to get there.
Very important insight. Very, very important insight. Marks, you want to throw the cherry on top?
I don't think there's anything I have to say that hasn't been said, but which is beautiful. But
right.
Yeah, just remember that you're a person and that people have needs. And even though we're throwing, when we talk about systemic problems, we think a lot about, pushing back and fighting against some overt problem, some overt issue. But sometimes it's just that we're being thrown into a system like we're some type of robot. And it's just really important to remember that you are actually not a robot, even if you are putting yourself in a position to be successful. And so I think listening, as cliche as it sounds, like listening to people really helps me practice. So like Amber was saying with her no committee, like I need people that I listen to, that I run things by. I need to be vulnerable in those spaces when I talk to those people. I need to trust people. I need to meditate. So it's when we talk about self-care, it's not just a moment, it's a practice. And it's something that you have to work at and work on consistently, or else you're not going to be good at it. So, I do believe in sharing one another's burdens. I do believe when I have something, I'm going to share it with you. And if you have something, you can bring it to me. But like Lisa said, right, I have a responsibility to do what I can for who I can, when I can. And when I can't, I have a responsibility to acknowledge that too and say no. So that's what I'd say.
Definitely. We appreciate the feedback. Definitely. I want to highlight putting yourself first, taking time for yourself, scheduling things for yourself, because regardless of what you believe, if you are not right, or if you are not at the place where you need to be, you cannot help anyone. And many times you may be destructive to some people if you are not at, not even 100%, but not at the place to receive, give advice and help. If you need that, you can't be that to someone else. I definitely echo a lot of what everyone said, especially the portion about committees. Even I myself, I have a committee, but it's important for me to have a friend sort of committee of colleagues, but a committee of people who I'm close with who are not in academia at all. Because when I need to joke, when I need to say something, I just need some jokes back, some memes, and those, they're my really close fraternity brothers. But having people who are sometimes not in your profession, and then you have to decide what to say and where to take some of that information, because some of it may not be translatable, but sometimes you just need that outside advice or that outside just feedback on certain things and from an objective perspective. So I think that's really important as well. So I want to thank the panelists for that. And just remember that regardless of your faculty members, of what you see or what you don't see, they are people, and they have, from what I've heard, spouses, kids, personal time, personal relationships, goals that they're trying to reach and create. All these things take time, and their time is precious. So it's important that we understand that and respect that. I do want to jump into a controversial question, and I'll leave it to our lovely hosts, especially Marcus being at Georgetown, to make sure that this is shared only with the people in the chat. But what are some ways you feel your institutions have failed underrepresented populations in the classroom? And Marcus is like, I ain't got no problem answering that.
I like smoke. I want all the smoke. So how have we failed students in classrooms? Sorry, I actually wrote this answer down because I was very upset. This was the third. Yeah. So I think, and this is something I mentioned earlier, thinking that systemic oppressions is limited to like derogatory slurs or overt issues. I think that students should understand that any time that classrooms are individualistic competitions, so like Amber was mentioning earlier, if it's like me versus Amber, like anytime that they think that, anytime that your professors are uncooperative or punitive, anytime when you don't know the professional status of the person teaching you, so this is what Lisa said, right? Are they grad students? Are they adjuncts? Are they tenure track faculty? In any of these spaces, students are being failed institutionally. So if we understand learning to be more than just jamming information into your brain, then it matters who's teaching you. So that's something that I think learning is deeper than school. I think we, faculty and administration, have to account for our participation in this life practice. And I know that is a bit meta. Like I respect that this is I'm a theorist, right? So, I got to keep my feet on the ground at times. But the reality is that, like, if we pay attention to the people we're learning from, to our elders, to the people who have been here before, there's a level of this where they say, I have a life, I am a person, and we are people. And I think as somebody I've worked with young people since I was 17, since I was a kid. And one of the things that has always been of utmost importance is recognizing that these are people with needs. These are whole people with needs, and they have their own pains and they have their own struggles. But any time that they come into a classroom space and we switch up and turn into this militaristic style hierarchy, at that point you have been failed in my estimation. And so I think that it's just the standard practice of teaching. And I think it's something that Lisa said earlier as well, in terms of really reimagining what you're doing in a classroom space. Why are you actually here? And I think when she describes getting into teaching through a different route, I think it's important to know that, because it teaches you as a student that there are there's more than one way to, well, it's probably not appropriate, to peel a potato. They skin a cat. It's not important.
Yeah.
But there's more than one way to do things. And it's in the moment that we fit our students into a box that they may not even have been aware exists, or that they may have already known existed, and we just assume what they need or what they want. Literally in that moment, we failed them. Teaching and learning are sacred. And we really need to value that relationship in a way that treats the student and treats ourselves as more than just, the wage labor, for our capitalist oppressors. So that's my opinion.
Thank you.
I have something to add to that, and it's not so much an institutional failure as for me, as it is just a faculty failure. And this, my colleagues. So my ongoing battle with some of my colleagues in my department is this notion. I have some colleagues that are, if a student is, a minute late, the door is locked, and I get it, because we're teaching business. And we're trying to set them up to have good, strong work ethic. You can't come to work late. We don't want you to come to class late. So I get all that. But what I think the two most important words for me in 2020 is just adaptability and flexibility, right? So we have students, that for some of them are caring for siblings while their parents are at work. So they're getting to us the best way they can. Some of them are, catching plane, trains, and automobiles in order just to get to the classroom. And so they may get there 5-10 minutes late. And when there's this just like rigidness about, you're not here exactly, then that always bothers me, because these are people and life happens. And yes, we are teaching work ethic, but, again, because I come with a different lens, I always start every class with, what can I do to help you be successful? If you have something that's going on, how can I help you navigate that? And I think we do our students a great disservice if we try to fit them all in a box. Everyone may not be able to get to class at 9:30. And some may say, well, then they shouldn't take a 9:30 class. And I think that's just such a narrow way to think. I unfortunately work with some people that, it seems like their goal is just to always prove like who the smartest person in the room is, and less of how can I help this student get to where they need to be. And I just think it's so important. I think we do them a disservice, because we've had students to withdraw and you know, drop out of school because of those type of interactions, when all that was necessary was just a little adaptability and a little modification. So I just think it's really important to just remember, you know, that we have all different types of students, and they're coming from all different backgrounds, and they have all different needs. And just like in the workplace, a person can have an accommodation. So, you know, because I teach business communications, if you come and tell me at the onset what's going on, I can help you. Now, if I never hear from you all semester and you're always late, you know, there's a level of accountability that also has to happen. But if you come to me, if we set the expectations early, and you tell me, listen, there may be sometimes I may be a couple minutes late because, you know, I got to catch the bus to get here. Sometimes it doesn't come and it doesn't start. You know, if you let me know, then I can work with you. But we have some faculty that are, you know, not interested in what your reasons are. They're just like, well, you're not here, so you know, absences equals 0. And that is just always frustrating to me as a faculty, because again, with the HR person in me is always thinking, how can we make it work, as opposed to how can I ding you for it and set you up to fail. So that's probably one of the biggest things I see that keeps a student from reaching their full potential, because now they're just kind of like, I'm not even interested at this point. And so I just think it's important to realize that students are people and have real things that are going on. And we have to be adaptable and flexible with that.
Great insight. Great insight, Lisa. I appreciate that, definitely. I had an argument with a friend / colleague who taught at a university who had that same rule, and he was talking to us casually about the rule. And, you know, he was like, well, you need to be here if it's 8 o'clock. I don't let anyone else in after that. And we were becoming combative. And another friend on the outside kind of said, I'm sorry, you're the second perfect person on this earth since the coming of Jesus Christ. And we all just kind of fell out and laughed. But that's kind of the perception. Is like, you know, you're setting them up to never make mistakes, as if you have not made any, or if you have never needed accommodations in your entire life. So I think that point is extremely important.
Yeah, I agree with that point. I mean, oh, sorry, go ahead. Oh, I was just saying, yeah, I mean, that point is really important. You know, I think the dynamics matter as well. Like, I mean, I think Lisa broke it down very well that if you're a student and you're going to have these particular issues come up, tell the professor early, like the first day of class, that these are the situations that I'm in. Because I'll tell you, depending on the size of the class for me, dictates what I say to everyone. It doesn't mean that I actually implement that. But like when I'm teaching undergrad classes, my classes range in size from 120 to 180. So what that means in any given class, I found that you're going to have about 10 to 15% of students where just something happens. So if I'm teaching my class of 180, that means I have about 40 students where something's happening. So if I don't set the tone early, it just leads to a host of issues. But when students come up to me and they tell me, hey, you know, I'm riding the bus, and the bus, you know, I'm going to probably be 5 minutes late because the bus is late. And I'm like, you're fine. I tell the TA or whomever, I'm like, make sure you don't mark them late. But the question was about how do we fail students in the classroom? I think we fail students every single day in every single classroom. And one of the main ways we do it, and I don't necessarily think our classes are this way, but overall, the content of syllabi is a way that we fail students. So oftentimes they're not representative of people that look like us. So we have to decolonize the syllabi that we use. If you're in graduate school, that's going to particularly happen in your theory classes. But one thing that I'll say is that oftentimes it's important to still learn that work, because then you're going to have to learn what you're going to have to challenge when you're trying to publish. And that's extremely, extremely important. And then what you do is you find people outside of those courses to help you interpret what you're doing. Because when your work is focused on intersections that are merging literatures together, the academic publication pipeline doesn't work like that. It's very straw man. So if you're merging literatures, it's going to be difficult for you to merge them until you find a model that's going to actually work for you. And for me, what I did was I found an undergraduate mentor, Dr. Wanda Rushing in Memphis. And then when I was getting my PhD, Dr. Quincy Stewart at Indiana, who's now at Northwestern, who I convinced both of them to do independent readings in race with me, because we didn't have courses set up that could really help me. And it took them a while for me to convince them, like over a year, where I would meet with them and say, hey, we could really just turn this into an independent study class. And that really helped me. So I say all that to say, sometimes we're not going to find everything we need in the classroom. The other thing that you can do as a student, an undergrad or a grad student, I think grad students do it a little bit better, but find out who the professor is. Find out what you're walking into. So the professor who doesn't let people come in their classroom after 8 o'clock has been doing that for 2 decades. Like, you're not going to change them at this point. It doesn't mean that you don't try to do something along those lines, but knowing those expectations, particularly if there are other sections of the course that can be taught, you could just say, I'm opting out of this person's course. This other professor is teaching this course next year. I think I'll wait until they teach it because they don't have these same issues.
Thank you. Thank you. Amazing feedback. Amazing feedback. So I'm looking at the time. I do want to be respectful of our time. We have a few more questions to get through. We're going to kind of jump into the current climate of what's going on campuses and how it's affecting our students. The first one is, and if you want, you can answer this in unison. I feel like I know what the answer is going to be, but do you believe institutions should open for in-person instruction for the 2020-2021 academic year? And we can do this like choir at church if you want. You can, we can do it any way you want.
No, for me.
And if so, why? Like, what are some of the challenges with that?
I think there are, we don't even need to hash out why health disparities are such an important, crucial factor in this decision to reopen. But apart from these just egregious disparities in health outcomes that are disproportionately affecting Black and Brown people, I think one of the biggest barriers right now, honestly, at the institutional level, is just a lack of imagination. I think we can do so much to envision and empower the best possibilities for education. But I think, to the previous point, that that's going to cause us to call into question a lot of these pathologies of education, right? How we've done things for so many years and how institutions have built identities around a particular modality of educating people. But I think, to be optimistic, I think there are a lot of possibilities with remote learning. And I think one of the biggest things that I'm thinking about now is how to design and restructure what I do in a way that maximizes accessibility, maximizes flexibility, maximizes the many possibilities as I can provide for students to engage with material, knowing that they come from a variety of different backgrounds, knowing that students have a lot of variation in the resources that are available to them, in the accessibility of internet at their homes, in the reliability of their home environments to be a safe and quiet place to work. Right? Knowing all of those things, how do I restructure what I do so that learning can still occur? But not only that, but so that students can thrive in their learning.
Right.
It's a big challenge, but thinking right. And for students who are in this chat now, I'm always kind of thinking a few steps ahead, right? So when things do return to normal, how can I take all this effort that I'm putting in now and still make it something that's useful down the road, right? And so I'm not just thinking about how to structure things in this particular time point, but I'm thinking about how to structure what I do now in ways that can still be of benefit to me and to my career and to the people around me a couple of years from now. So I don't know, stay tuned.
Thank you, definitely.
I'm torn on it. I think I'm different. Like Rashawn, I heard you say you had classes of like 180. My classes are 30. So I think, you know, if you have a class size that can accommodate, I'm a faculty who said, yeah, I'll go back, but I can only have 9 people in the class, which I'm fine with. So I actually sent out a survey to my students because I'm always trying to assess who needs what, right? And so I asked, you know, who needs to be face to face? Again, I'm teaching synchronously Zoom all day. My eyes are shot. If I can get back into the classroom safely, I want to do that. And I think, you know, it just helps for the content that I'm teaching. So I've asked the question, who needs to be, I have a lot of people on like an autism spectrum who actually need to be in the classroom. So who needs to be, who wants to be online, and who wants to be a hybrid. And only a handful of students have said that they definitely want to be face-to-face only. Those face-to-face only students are less than 9. They can come to the classroom, I'll be there. They've installed plexiglass, we'll have masks on, the classroom is big enough that they can sit way in the back, I can properly socially distance them. And so I'm comfortable with that. I would not be comfortable in a class of 30. It's no way I would go back in a class of 30, but a class of 8 or 9, I'm completely fine with. They're making us take tests. I take mine, you know, on Monday, and we're testing periodically. So they're putting some things in place to where I feel comfortable. I'm asthmatic, so it's really important to me that I don't get sick. I also have a house full of kids. Again, I also have a mother in a nursing home, so I don't want to get sick. But as long, you know, to me, my institution is taking the proper steps. They're putting me in a larger classroom as well so that I can spread out people. So, you know, everyone does not learn well. I'm also happy that the institution, that the university is open, you know, to Amber's point. You know, I have students where the campus is the safest place for them. And so I'm glad that they have a place to be. I have students that don't have food at home, so they can at least eat on campus. I have students that don't have any internet access, so the what's it called? The computer lab is open. And so while every class, only 70% of our classes are actually, 70% of our classes are still going to be online. For that 30, I'm happy at least that the campus is at least open, even if we're not teaching face-to-face, so the students that need what they need can still get what they need. But so I'm going back, but I'm going back with caution, and only because I can only have 8. That's the only reason. And I'm comfortable with 8. And I'll be live streaming the rest. So it's streaming at the same time.
Sorry, I interrupted, Lisa.
Go ahead.
I wanted to piggyback on what you said, which is, so I live on campus. I'm a faculty in residence. And so the reality is that there are an overabundant number of students who do not have the resources they need at home. And so making campus space available to them, that was one of the first things my spouse and I noticed when we moved here, which is that all of my students were already on campus in the summertime. So why are y'all here? They're like, we're working, we have jobs. And so that was one of my biggest things when the Rona hit. How are they going to be paying for things? They had jobs because they needed jobs, right? And so there's that. Beyond that, I take a bit of a harder line on returning. So I don't think any school should be in anywhere. I think that Rona right now is a death lottery, and it's not a game I'm interested in playing for me or any of the students. Also, something that I've recognized, and I think a lot of us see, is that while we know that COVID-19 is disproportionately affecting people of color and Black people and Indigenous people in particular, not because it's targeting us, but because of the systemic problems that we have. Police, as we know, are also disproportionately a problem. And what a lot of people are missing, I think, is that these two things are coming together when we're talking about how we're securing campus safety during the era of Corona. So when people are coming back to campus, they're talking about having checkpoints. They're talking about having these comprehensive systems of testing. They're talking about all this surveillance and all these things that we know harm us. They harm our students. Our students are vulnerable. We are vulnerable. And so if you're on a campus like mine, where there is no Black Faculty Union or Black Faculty Senate, where we don't have a voice in these conversations collectively, we may have, a couple of Black faces in high places, which are important, but without that type of space, we are less safe. and nobody here is going to be free in that environment where Black students are being encouraged or pushed to recognize their needs. That was another thing I wanted to say too, is that the system of accommodations have never been built for us. We are not taught to even know what accommodations we need. The overwhelming majority of the work that I do with students is helping them recognize that they have needs, because a lot of times they just think this is just what it is. This is normal. And so, we operate in a space where we want them to be fully aware. And I recognize that they still have agency, while at the same time, they may have never actually been given space or time to consider, what do I need? And so in a moment like this, I don't think anyone should be in school, public or private school, anywhere. The whole semester should be canceled. It should have been canceled when it started. I want all the smoke.
You got to get that on a shirt or something. Just walk into every faculty meeting just like, I want it all the smoke.
Got well in faculty.
So I want to close out. I'm looking at the time again. I want to respect the staff panel that starts at 4. So I do want to close out with the final question. There was a good political question that I'm just not going to be able to get to. But what is the one thing you've learned as a Black faculty member at a predominantly white institution that you feel has helped you on your journey? And I think this is really important because it can be advice to a lot of our students, a lot of our members of this conference, just to kind of understand some of the things some nuggets that have helped you on this particular journey as a Black faculty member.
I'll go first. Failure is normal. Treat it as such. Learn to be okay with failure and keep shooting your shot. That's the thing about the academy. You're going to fail a lot. You're going to get rejected a lot. Your paper is going to get marked up a lot. People are going to tell you your work isn't good. And the more you learn how to deal with that process, the better your work is going to be. And I treat it like I think about sports. If we look at the best athletes, let's take Black basketball. I mean, some of the best 3-point shooters are only 1 for 3 and shooting threes. Like, learn to be okay with those statistics. The best baseball players only get a hit 1 out of every 3 times they come up to bat. Learn to be okay with those statistics. Part of the problem is that as great students, as we progress throughout the pipeline, we are used to basically being perfect. But as you go throughout the pipeline, the criteria for perfection, the bar is higher. Learn to be okay with failure and trying to reach that. I fail astronomically more than I succeed. And the only reason why I succeed is because I keep shooting my shot.
I just say, stay true to who you are. Always show up as your authentic self, and that you deserve to be here, and never let anybody make you feel otherwise.
I was going to say, this panel has been amazing. To the final question, I'd say that I had to learn that I get to write my own story, and that I'm a character in more stories than just mine. So community is a practice. It's something that I have to remind myself. It's a practice of remembrance. And for me, that starts with constantly reminding myself to be considerate of other people's stories, whether I'm in a footnote or a starring role, right? That they have their stories and I have my story. And in a world that I want to imagine, those stories can coexist and should.
Yeah, I don't know if you're on mute.
I had it on mute. No, I was thanking all of our panelists, and thank you, Rajan, and thanks to Erica for such a fantastic event. I think my final note would be that I've learned to see myself as a contender, and that's what I would tell everybody else. See yourself as a contender. It was kind of crazy when I got my PhD. I looked up the stats because I'm a methodologist and I'm always thinking about numbers. But fewer than 2% of people in the U.S. earn a PhD. Of that 2%, less than 5% are Black women, and in my field, Black women are closer to 1%. So our existence in this space is meaningful, and I think the more we can see ourselves as contenders for, the goals that we're after, the more we can see ourselves as door openers, right? People who hold this pathway open, so that people from all backgrounds can excel in this space. I think we have a lot of agency in creating the future that we have always imagined. And it just starts by one action at a time, but you have to see yourself as a contender in all of those actions.
Thank you. I want to again thank the panel definitely for the insight that you shared with the members of the summit. It is extremely important. I also want to say, future Dr. Simmons, you right there. So happy and proud of you. Amber, Marcus, Rayshawn, if I slide in your professional emails and ask for advice, don't shoot me down. Just know those emails are coming. And of course, thank you to our lovely host, Miss Erica Blake. Love you so much, and I appreciate you.
Brilliant.
Thank you. Y'all have exceeded any expectations for this panel, and I just really appreciate it. I know everyone that has attended appreciated it as well. I will definitely be in contact with all of you in the future, but just thank you so much. And for everyone that's here now, the faculty panel will be beginning in a few moments. So if you want to head over, not the faculty, the staff panel will be beginning in a few moments. If you want to head over there and get that work as well, that would be great. But yeah, thank y'all again.
Get that smoke. Get that smoke.
All right, thank y'all.
Thank you.